Welcome to a conversation with Dr. Ann Mckee, Chair of Neuropathology at VA Boston Healthcare System, Professor of Medicine at BU School of Medicine, and Director of the BU CTE Center. I'm Ken Freeman, Allen Question Professor, and Dean of the Boston University Question School of Business. Ann, we're honored to have you with us today. Dr. Mckee, congratulations in order right up front. You were recently named the Time 2018 on the list of the 100 most influential people in the world. Congratulations.
Thank you. It was really thrilling for me. I never would have expected it, but I'm really honored.
Let's go right back to the beginning. Would you be willing to share your background a little bit with us this afternoon?
Sure. I was born in the Midwest in a place called Appleton, Wisconsin. I'm the fifth of 5 kids, and I grew up with 2 rowdy brothers who tortured me and bullied me and teased me and also taught me how to play football. They called me the best tackling dummy they've ever had. But I grew up playing football and loving football. It was certainly part of my community and culture. And after I went to medicine, I wanted to study the brain. I'm not sure exactly how that happened, but I got very interested in how the mind and brain work.
And did you start with medicine at the very beginning in terms of your interest, or did
yeah,
it evolve?
I was very broad, generalist, internal medicine. I narrowed it down to neurology because it's a mystery, and it's like solving a puzzle, trying to figure out why a person is experiencing the symptoms they are. And then after completing that neurology residency, I wanted to do neuropath because I still wanted to get deeper and understand the problem at a really deep level, which was looking at the brains after death.
Yeah. Now you're playing an instrumental role in advancing knowledge and awareness of chronic traumatic encephalopathy. How did you become interested specifically in CTE?
Well, it was just it was spontaneous. I was studying Alzheimer's disease and other related dementias. I was particularly interested in the protein called tau that builds up in a number of these diseases. And I wanted to, so I was very comprehensively categorizing the brains from the Freeman Heart Study as well as the Alzheimer's Disease Center for their tau pathology. And I'd looked at thousands of brains. And one of the cases came in, it was a former boxer, and he was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, but when I looked at his tissue, it was this florid, very unusual pattern I'd never seen, even though I'd been looking at so many brains. And that became very fascinating to me. I wanted to understand that better. So I started looking at more boxers, and then, as luck would have it, someone asked me if I'd be willing to look at the brains of football players. And so that was a collision of 2 extreme interests. So that was something I was not going to say no to.
Yeah. And what is CTE in layman's terms?
So CTE is a neurodegenerative disease. It's triggered by repetitive head trauma. That can be concussive injury, it can be things like blast injury. And once it's established, it's a progressive disease that over time affects your ability to think and remember, and it can affect your personality and your behavior and your mood. It can be quite devastating when you have it.
Now, you've evaluated the brains of scores of former NFL players.
Hundreds.
Over 100.
Yeah.
What have the results been?
The NFL players, and you have to realize that all of those people play at high levels and often for very long times. Their brains very often show signs of CTE after death. In fact, in our series of 202 football players, 111 of which were NFL, 110 or 99% had CTE. And most cases, the CTE was severe.
And you had done the research, and at one point the NFL asked you to go to New York and share your findings.
Right. Well, that was early on when we only had about 5 cases. So we went to New York, we presented it to them, and it was really met with just dismissal and denial, and they thought it was my problem, sort of the kill the messenger sort of thing. And they didn't take it seriously at all. They just thought I was misdiagnosing a disease.
Was this grounded in evidence they had, or was this grounded in something different than that?
I feel it was a preconceived notion. They had shut their minds to the possibility before I even got there. And I certainly didn't make a dent in that.
Now, you went, if I recall, you went with a former pro wrestler.
I did.
With you. How did that all come to pass?
Well, I was going to Park Avenue, the NFL, headquarters. I was a little intimidated. I knew it was going to be a room of powerful, very influential men. And I thought that it would be nice to at least have a physical presence with me. So I asked the NFL if they would be willing to have Chris Nowinski, this former professional wrestler, accompany me. And they said yes, but only on the condition that he does not speak. So, but he was there, and that was comforting to me.
Mm. So coming out of that meeting, did you leave optimistic, pessimistic, or in despair?
I was definitely very down. I really, I had some academic credentials at that point. My opinion wasn't worth nothing, and I was dismissed like I was an errand boy or something. And what was interesting is Chris, who was a successful young man, former college football player, successful wrestler. I think he was really surprised because I think he got to see what happens to women sometimes when they're marginalized and dismissed just for the sheer sake of how they look.
Is it particularly a particular issue with emphasis for women scientists, would you say, from an industry standpoint, for women scientists in the world of research to have the challenge of being in a quote-unquote man's world?
Oh, absolutely. When I started med school, they were very proud of the fact that 20% of the med school was now female, but my patients all thought I was a nurse, and they would ask when the doctor was coming. I'd get asked out on dates by patients. I mean, it was like you just had to deal with a lot of attitudes that really weren't very enlightened.
Was that prior experience what gave you the calluses, if you will, the courage, the resilience coming out of that NFL meeting? That sounds like it was a very unfortunate meeting to say, I'm not giving up. In fact, I'm redoubling my efforts here.
Oh yeah, it was a very familiar feeling. It was, so when I got when you're in a situation like that, it's like, here we go again. And it's happened so repeatedly that it was like, all right, I'm punching back, I'm fighting back.
Yeah, and you have not given up, and
Apparently
you're making progress.
I haven't.
Now, in your opinion, why has the NFL been so slow to react to the medical evidence associated with CTE?
Well, I think it's all the bottom line. It's all financial. It's not in their financial best interest to have this disease in their, even acknowledge the existence of this disease. So they have repeatedly over the years obfuscated the science, made it seem like the scientists disagree. They've minimized the work. It's been a very effective strategy because the public for many years thought that we were in massive disagreement about this, when in actuality my papers were getting published in very high-level journals. So there was this they wanted to confuse and delay and sort of divert the attention to this disorder.
And would they be looking for researchers that might be friends and family, if you will, for the NFL? Maybe
yes.
Not necessarily having the credentials, but being able to say they were an MD or have some aspect of credential.
Yeah, and there's always been a crowd of scientists and researchers who viewed my work negatively. I mean, it hasn't all been just the NFL. I mean, I've been up against a scientific community that wasn't all that happy about changing the paradigm of traumatic brain injury, because we did change a paradigm. And so it's been difficult. And what would happen was individuals who spoke out against my science would get funded.
Dr. Mckee, you're an amazing leader. You're resilient and highly courageous. What is it that has given you that inner strength to really prevail and continue on the mission without giving up?
Think of myself as a leader or even being courageous. I just felt that what I was saying was the truth, and I wanted the truth to be known, and it affected patients, it affected lives, it affected families, and I felt I had a duty or an obligation to do whatever I could to protect those people. And I had a knowledge that not everybody had. And I needed people to recognize the knowledge and accept it. Otherwise, I wasn't going to be able to help or change the world.
So the patient focus that you learned way back at the beginning of medical school, right, prevails to this very day in how you live and how you operate.
Yeah, and I also think, believe it or not, I think my brothers might have helped, because I was always fighting against my brothers, and instead of being, I was seriously younger than they were and much smaller, and there were two of them, and I think just having to fight back against those odds taught me I could fight back.
Well, there's always a great source of calluses, and that may have been it. Do you believe the NFL's been selective, if you will, in what evidence, the CTE evidence, they're willing to acknowledge and what they're not willing to acknowledge?
Oh, absolutely. They always acknowledge the stuff that's really on the fringe, that isn't well done in many cases. They know what they want to find, and if someone finds something different, that they turn away. I mean, they have an agenda, and they just want to support the agenda. And
it's been highly publicized that they've put over $100 million now, the NFL says, in research.
Right.
Is it research that will be valuable, do you think?
I think it's research. They tend to fund studies with investigators that are inclined in alignment with them, and then sometimes they fund studies that are really peripheral to the whole thing, to sort of this diversionary tactic. They have a study that they're funding in the UK on horseback riding and concussions, and even if they find that it's not related to CTE, what does that have to do with football?
A great deal of attention concerning the NFL and CTE is leveled at the commissioner, at Roger Goodell, the leader at the top. From your perspective, where have the other major stakeholders in the NFL been? For instance, the owners, the Players Association, sponsors, media outlets, and the like.
Well, clearly the owners and the businessmen, the people whose financial basis is really part of the NFL, they've all been very negative. I mean, there's no question about that. The NFLPA was not very receptive either, especially in the beginning, although I think slowly they've changed. In fact, I was just recently at the NFLPA, and they were quite complimentary about the research, and said that I was standing up for football players, which was a switch. I hadn't been welcomed into that group quite like that before.
Do you envision the wives of former NFL players who have become much more vocal over the years? Do they play a vital role in this whole activity?
They certainly do in the individuals who've been affected, because the wives suffer the brunt of this disease. These are individuals who are many times very large and muscular, and they can become aggressive and irritable and impulsive, and at times they can be very threatening. So the wives have been really bearing a lot of the brunt of this disorder. And so it was important that they speak out, and people like Sylvia Mckee with John Mckee, really were leaders in raising awareness about this disease. It's not quite the same case for wives of active or more recent players, because there's a sort of a status or charisma to being an NFL wife, and I think they don't want to lose that. But once they see how it's affecting them and their family, that's when they become outspoken.
Speaking of the effects of CTE, what is the rate of CTE in the general population, and as opposed to the rate of CTE in a former NFL player?
Well, we're still working on the prevalence, exact prevalence studies, but it's quite low in the general population. Say in the Framingham cohort that comes to autopsy, it's between 2 and 3%. It's quite low. But in the brain bank that recruits for head trauma, it's very high. In our brain bank, it's about 87%. So, and those brains are being donated by families who are not sophisticated in their diagnostic methods. I mean, these are just families who think there might be something wrong, that it's worth a shot, and many times they're right.
And some might say the 87% is an unusually high number because of the nature of the sample size.
Right, it's selection bias. It selects that people don't pursue brain donation if everything is going well. And that's true. It is a biased sample, but all brain bank samples are biased. And this extraordinary percentage that we found in former football players and in former NFL players speaks to this cannot be a rare condition. In fact, it must be extraordinarily common. It's very unusual to get 177 cases in just a matter of 8 years if this disease were rare. I mean, I could go out tomorrow and look for some other rare disease and I wouldn't get 177 cases.
Very interesting. We often strive to work with our students to talk about ethical situations where they might need to go against the norm against the prevailing view and powerful interests, that they have an obligation, if you will, to dissent. Do you believe there's any possibility that any of the NFL stakeholders will have the courage over time to speak out about CTE?
No, I don't. I think that money and finances are regarded so highly that will always be the triumphant.
So you see no way. So it really does, this whole notion of the survivors, the wives and the friends and family of the former NFL players, the continuing evaluation is so vitally important then for further validation.
But I also think that if this starts impacting the bottom line, if this starts lowering the attendance at games, if this starts lowering the viewership on TV, if this lowers the number of players who actually come to try out for the NFL because Pee Wee and junior football is down, which it is. Once it starts to impact the industry, then I think they're going to take this more seriously.
Is it possible for an athlete to play football and not suffer from CTE?
Oh, absolutely. It requires usually decades of exposure. So the shorter your career, the less likely you are to get this. And we think that there is an influence about the age that you play. The age that you play has been shown in our studies to cause more symptoms later in life. And it can also be style of play. Like some players play with their head, they spear with their head, they tackle with their head, and other players don't. And though that can make a huge difference in their susceptibility to the disease.
Which implies perhaps rules changes could in fact help the circumstance.
And they have probably, lengthening the kickoff and things like that. That's going to change everything. They've made changes about tackles and types of hits. All of that is helpful. But what they really have to do now is also address the subconcussive hits that occur every play of the game. And that's sort of a routine part of football. That's the objective of football, to tackle them and cause them to fall down. So somehow football's got to address that. And that is going to have to be either changes in how much they play. Maybe they don't play as long a season. Maybe they play a shorter season. They don't play preseason. They don't practice 365 days a year. They practice without pads, without any contact. I mean, there are ways to adapt to this and really make the game safer, but we have to get the buy-in of the
And are there specific
NFL
positions that are less susceptible, based on your research, to CTE than others?
Well, we think, we don't have enough players with the disease to really make a definitive statement, but certainly the linebackers get more hits, running backs get a lot of hits. We see less of it in punters and kickers, but we've seen it in every position, believe it or not. And because often people don't play the same position all their life. So they're all at risk, but some individuals may be more at risk than others.
Is there a genetic potential cause for this in addition to concussions and subconcussive injuries?
Well, there's a genetic probably susceptibility and resistance. Head trauma is still the trigger and the cause, but some types of genes may protect from this or make it more likely to happen. What we've seen in our studies now, with, I forgot the exact number, but it's almost 300 individuals with CTE. It might be over 300. We see that some players get a more severe degree of it at a younger age, and there may be something in their genetics that cause that, or it may be something in their style of play and their pain threshold. A lower pain threshold is actually helpful, because if they can go through these hits day after day after day with no changes that they're aware of, they're going to actually be at higher risk.
Recently, a study was released relative that you were very much in the middle of and lead of relative to youth playing football.
Right.
It offers some very conclusive statements about the age at which a child should start playing football. Could you tell us a bit more about the results of the study itself?
Yeah, so we looked at individuals who played football, tackle football, before the age of 12 compared to those who started after 12. And we chose the age of 12 because there's this dynamic period of development, a very dynamic period that occurs between 8 and 12. The brain actually isn't fully developed until they're about mid-20s. So it goes over a long period of time. And what we found, surprisingly, it wasn't that they got more severe CTE if they started before 12, but they were less resilient to the effects of the disease. So they actually developed symptoms much earlier than those who started to play after 12. And on average, it was 13 years earlier, which is quite substantial. 13 years is a long time when you're living with symptoms of a disease.
So as a parent, would you let your children play football?
No, I wouldn't, because to me the most important thing in my children's life is that they live the longest, most healthy, productive life they possibly can. And so I know that football has a chance, there's a risk of lowering their lifetime productivity and lowering their brain health. And so that is not something I'd be willing to gamble with.
What about hockey or soccer as an example, both sports that also have the use of the head, if you will?
Right. Well, soccer's not as much of a problem. It's mostly related to heading of the ball. There are collisions in soccer, but they tend to be much less often. It's random, not, as opposed to every play, every game. And then in hockey, we definitely have seen CTE in hockey. It tends to be more in the enforcers, naturally, we know that boxing is also a risk for CTE, so fights are going to be a risk for CTE. But there's also rule changes that could be done in hockey that would really lessen the risk. And part of that's because hockey head trauma isn't intrinsic to hockey. It's something that happens, but it's not intrinsic to the play of the game. Football, there's intrinsic head trauma just in how the game is played.
Is the NHL leadership at the league office treating the issue, the risk of CTE, any differently than the NFL is?
If anything, they're living more in the dark ages. They think that CTE is not a problem for hockey players, and there's no clear evidence that CTE exists, and it's not related to head trauma. And it's, if anything, it's more discouraging than the NFL. But we're changing that. We're looking at hockey, and we'll be publishing on hockey fairly soon.
What's your response to those who say that football, particularly at the college and the professional levels, has given young men tremendous educational and financial opportunities that might not otherwise have those opportunities, and that there are risks in many sports and professions?
Well, I mean, college level football. I don't think the majority of college level football players want to go into the NFL. I don't think they see themselves as their life being determined by football. I don't think it's the most important. I think most likely, if you ask the average college player, they want to have a good job and live a long, healthy life. So I agree that football can lead to camaraderie and teamwork and lots of values and ethics of a combined effort. But I don't think it's unique to football. I think there are many team sports that would give you that same kind of sense of identity and cooperation. So, I don't buy the argument that football is the only way to understand those values.
During congressional hearings, the NFL was compared to big tobacco by Representative Linda Sanchez from California. Like big tobacco, the asbestos industry, and others before them, do you feel the NFL is playing first the deny and then the delay game for the inevitable that's going to come forward as it relates to CTE?
Yes, I actually think they're playing from the tobacco playbook. I think they've got the same legal strategies. I think it's very reminiscent of what happened with tobacco. And the result is going to be the same. You can delay it and you can deny it, but the truth is the truth, and the truth always wins.
How long do you think it'll take for the truth to win in this instance in pro football?
I've seen a big change in the last 5 years compared to where we were when we began. Once we have a way to identify this disease during life, it's going to be irrefutable. And that's when it's going to be, time for the NFL to really
So maybe
pay up.
10, 15 years, something like that?
10 maybe.
10
yeah.
maybe. Interesting. Often we see shortcomings in others that we don't see in ourselves. NFL Commissioner Goodell is known for wielding tremendous power over the players, over the coaches, over the owners, when rules are broken or unethical behavior is perceived. Would you say he has a biased perception of his own lack of action where CTE is concerned?
Absolutely. He keeps saying that playing football's never been safer, that they're solving the concussion crisis. I mean, a lot of this is just False. They're not dealing with the most dangerous part of football, which is the subconcussive repetitive hits that occur in every play of the game. They're dealing with concussion. It's an important issue, but it's not the major issue. And this idea that football's never been safer, I think is just ridiculous.
If the end result here is that over time there'll be implications that'll be realized in football as it relates to CTE, and it takes the general public in a way having the responsibility or the opportunity to really force change on football as more people learn of the potential issues, fewer kids playing football,
Right.
et cetera. What's it going to take for the general public to really get to the level of awareness and commitment, or is that just not a hurdle that can be overcome?
Well, I don't know what that is. It's always been discouraging for me that we're not there yet. I keep thinking, what do I have to do? But I think as people start to see that this is a problem really for the entire country, that this isn't just isolated to very highly paid football players, that this is a problem for your kids, this is a problem for young high school athletes, this is a problem for college athletes, this is a problem for our military, which we will always have to have. As people start to realize the magnitude and how this affects lots of people out of lots of ways of life, I think finally we're going to get some acknowledgement and working for a solution.
Can women have CTE as
Yes,
well?
it's been described in 2 women. One was autistic. She banged her head as a part of a developmental issue. She developed CTE at the age of 24. And then there was a woman who was a victim of domestic abuse, abused for many years by her husband, and she had CTE. We have not seen it in our brain bank, but we've only had 4 women donors out of 550, and that's because traditionally sports and military were a man's world, but that's changed now, but that's relatively recent, and it'll take time. In time we'll start to see those females be brain donors. We're very concerned about it though, especially as regards to domestic abuse, because we've definitely got a lot of clinical cases where we can see changes on their MRI that are very suggestive of CTE, and they have behavioral effects and cognitive effects that we think are CTE. So that may be actually one of the next frontiers, is looking at domestic abuse in women.
The veterans, the military, don't have the same economic incentive, if you will, as the NFL owners do.
Right.
What's your sense of how the military is addressing the CTE challenge? Are they doing things dramatically differently in the military for their personnel than what the NFL is doing?
Yes. I mean, the VA in particular has always been very supportive. In fact, my research would never have continued for sometimes during the low periods if it hadn't been for the VA. The VA has consistently supported this work. And I think part of that is because the VA stands to really suffer if this becomes a big problem for veterans, many of whom are also athletes. The VA is going to be footing the bill for their long-term care, and that could be quite substantial. The DoD is progressively more interested in funding these types of studies. And the NIH too. So it's been slow, but I think people are starting to change.
You've evolved from being a scientist to a world-class scientist to now being a phenomenal leader, recognized as one of the 100 most influential people in the world. Have you learned any leadership lessons along the way?
No, I mean, what I've learned is you can do a lot more than you ever thought you could do. I mean, I've been put in situations that I never thought I'd be in, talking to the NFL at NFL headquarters, going to the Pentagon and talking to the chief of staff, just many positions that I never thought, I thought were way above my level, but I guess you rise to the occasion or something.
Are you naturally an outgoing person?
No, I was very shy. I hated public speaking. When I went to school, I never raised my hand. So this is all very odd, and it happened kind of late in my life. I thought my career was established in Alzheimer's. I never expected, and all of a sudden things changed, and changed very rapidly.
Dr. Mckee, if you could offer one piece of advice to students who come to school to get their degrees and then go off into the world, hopefully to make a big difference, what advice would you give students of today?
Well, I would say believe in yourself. Don't let the naysayers get you down. Keep going. Work hard. It's not easy. Believe me, I didn't get here because I didn't work. It's been a lot of work, and it's required work from a lot of my team. But just believe in yourself. And if you have something that's important to say, make sure you keep saying it.
Persistence and perseverance and expertise pay off. We've been in conversation with Dr. Ann Mckee. Thank you for joining us, and Dr. Mckee, thank you so very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.